It's A-level results time. This is usually a time for celebration, and yet we've got another government fiasco on our hands, with lots of working class students at state schools having their grades downgraded. This is part of a much bigger story where we see the workings of class in the UK education system. Hello, welcome to Attic Philosophy. On this channel, we're making philosophical ideas accessible and relevant, and we're discussing social issues in a philosophical way. If that's your kind of thing, consider subscribing to the channel, hit the bell to get updates. So I'm going to be talking about university admissions in the UK and how that relates to school grades, particularly A-level grades. I used to be a university admissions tutor, so I've got some experience in this. And I'm going to be using an analogy, okay? Going to think about university admissions as being like a queue. The further up the queue you are, the more likely you are to get into the university of your choice. This analogy comes from a philosopher called Adam Smith in his 2003 book, How Not to Be a Hypocrite. Now, we all think that queue jumping, particularly paying to jump up the queue, is unfair. Yet in the UK, we have a way of queue jumping, a paid way of queue jumping for getting into universities. There's a way you can pay money, and you jump up the queue because you get higher grades than you otherwise would have got if you hadn't have paid. And that's called private schooling. Data shows that if you go to private school, you will get higher grades than you otherwise would have got if you'd gone through the state system. So by paying the money, going to private schools, you get better grades. That gets you higher up the queue, further along the queue into your choice of university. Research by the Sutton Trust revealed that just 8 schools, all in the southeast of England, 6 of them private schools, filled 1,310 Oxbridge places over the years 2015 to 2017, compared with 1,220 from 2,900 other schools. And it doesn't just end there, because there's evidence that the more money you pay, the higher up the queue you go, the further along the queue you can jump to get into your first choice of university. So for instance, the UK's 2 most expensive private schools, Eton and Winchester, and they charge £14,167 and £13,903 per term. They're also by far the 2 most successful of all UK schools in terms of Oxbridge offers. So we have this big class divide in the UK in how education works, and specifically in terms of getting into your university of choice. Currently, we've got a fiasco with A-level grades. Students weren't able to sit in-person exams because of COVID. So the government came up with an algorithm that looks at factors like a student's predicted grades, their pass grades in mocks, and the performance of their school, and came up with a grade based on this algorithm. And guess what? It's been a complete disaster. Students who have been predicted A's have come away with E's. People who had offers for university now don't have university places. And the problem is, it's hit state schools. Private school grades increased by 4.7 percentage points, over double the increase for comprehensive state school pupils, and almost 3 times that for academy, again, state schools pupils' grades. Nearly half of all exams now sat by private school students result in an A or A-star grade. And this compares to just 1 in 5 exams set by comprehensive students get an A-star or A grade. Okay, so if you pay to go to private school, you are just way more likely to get good A or A-star grades. Okay, so what? The data shows that there is this huge class differential in the UK, and that it's been made worse by this government algorithm. What should we do about that? What should we think about that? I think this is super important, because grades, they matter to you as a student, but it's not just about that. Grades are what unlocks so much of our social and economic life, okay? Grades are by and large what get you into your university of choice. Your university of choice, well, that's where you develop as an individual, it's where you develop as a citizen, but it's also what unlocks your future. It gets you into your career, your job, it trains you up. Is going to university everything? No, of course not, okay? Lots of people don't go to university, that's absolutely fine. You can live a perfectly great, meaningful life without going to university. The point is, if you're a talented student and you want to go to university, you should, whatever your background. And for some aspects of life, if you want to help people out by being a doctor or you want to improve the legal system by being a lawyer, you have to go and do a degree first, so you have to be admitted to university. Okay, so for these kinds of reasons, and also the sense of defeat if you don't get admitted, it's really important that university admissions are done fairly. And that, by and large, requires A-levels to be given out in a fair way. Okay, so you hear people say, we need a meritocratic system, okay? It should be done on merit. How do we measure merit? They say, well, we test people by doing A-level exams just before we go to university. So the system, it may have a class bias, but it's at least meritocratic. I don't buy this argument. Let's go back to the queuing analogy, okay? What do we need to have a fair queue? Well, it's no good if there's loads of queue jumping at the beginning, but then the queue settles down and when the doors open up and people are let in, there's no queue jumping then. Then you could say, oh, it's meritocratic because everybody gets admitted based on their place in the queue. If there was loads of queue jumping in the first place, that's still an unfair system. And it's the same in the case of schooling. If you get a huge boost early on in your school career or at any point during your school career, it's an unfair, rigged system. The concept of merit is actually really difficult. What do we mean by merit? Well, it's not just an exam that you sit when you're 16 or 17 or 18. Merit comes out in all different ways. Think about it the other way around. Think about it from the point of what universities are for and what they're looking for in a student. You don't just want somebody who can cram and do really well at an exam. You want somebody who can flourish by studying at university. A-levels are kind of a proxy for that, but they're not a great one. In my view, a student who's been to a really tough school where maybe the average grades are pretty low, but comes out with, say, Bs, has demonstrated more skill, more aptitude, more merit, perhaps, than somebody who has been to a school where the average grades are Bs and has come out with a combination of Bs and As. Okay, so the second student has higher A-levels, but they haven't demonstrated as much grit, as much graft, as much talent maybe, as the student who has excelled in a really tough school. In my view, private schooling in the UK, it's just queue jumping for the economically privileged. It's a deeply unfair, unjust, unequal system, and it needs to be abolished. Now, I think that might be a tricky thing to bring about. It's a goal for the long term. What should we do in the short term? I think there's two things we could do. University management, the people in power at universities, need to look at their admissions procedures. They need to take more contextual information into account. That means looking at a student's background, the kind of school they went to, the average grades at that school, and seeing how the student did compared to the average. Most universities, in their admissions procedures, kind of assume that a privately educated student is their kind of typical student and then everyone else is dealt with around that. That's not the way it should be. Only 7% of UK students go to a private school. The typical student in the UK goes to a state school. University admissions procedures should reflect that. The typical entry grades should be based around the typical state school student. Grades should then be lowered for students who have been in really difficult circumstances because of their background or whatever, and then offers should be raised correspondingly for privately educated students who have paid loads of money and had all those extra facilities. Okay, so universities could do this, but again, it's not easy because universities have been forced to compete with each other by the government's approach to education. And one university isn't going to start doing that and giving its advantage to other universities. Now, universities shouldn't be competing with each other, but they're being forced to by the government. So this is something the government has to sort out. The other thing that we could do straight away to make this situation better is, at the moment, Students can't sit their exams because of COVID. There has to be some kind of way of putting together the information that we have to give them grades so they can get on with their lives. We could do this in a more just way. We could do this by levelling up. Those students who have been to difficult schools, they need to be brought up to the level of students who have had all of that privilege. Students who have shown hard work, talent, dedication. They need that work, that aptitude, that merit rewarded, because those students, they're going to do really well at university. So I recently wrote about this issue in an article for Novara Media. I've got a link to it down in the description. That article ends by saying class inequality in education has to be addressed nationally. Moderating this year's students' grades in a way that reduces rather than exacerbates inequality would be a good start. It really would be a good start. Inequality ultimately hurts everyone. An equal society, ultimately a fair society, is good for everyone. Thanks for listening this far. If you're one of the students who's been affected by these issues, I really hope it resolves itself sometime soon. I hope you're going to get those places at university that you deserve. If you've enjoyed the video, consider subscribing, hit the bell to get updates. I'll see you back here soon.